Tonight, New Orleans is a city in crisis.
Police are looking for leads. Extremely violent crime wave.
And multiple reports of a strange noise.
Yeah, the source of that noise is still unclear.
Louisiana is an absolutely fascinating place with so much history, and with a place rich in history comes many terrible tales and local legends to go along with it. From disasters to battle and even the story of a daring pirate, these small towns have terrifying stories, so let's dive right in. Starting off our list today, we have Natchitoches. I'm so sorry, I likely said that wrong, and I'm sure that there will be some other town names that I mispronounce later on. So just let me know kindly down in the comments how you would say them. Alright, I'm here to learn. Louisiana's oldest town, Natchitoches, is known for its stunning historic district and beautiful Cane River, but it also harbors a darker past. Among the most whispered about sites is the Magnolia Plantation, where some claim to hear the clanking of chains from the days of slavery and see ghostly figures in the fields at night. Another notable location is the haunted Bullard Mansion, where the apparition of a sorrowful woman is said to wander the rooms, mourning a tragic loss from centuries ago. Along the Cane River, locals and visitors have reported unexplained lights and shadowy figures, suggesting a lingering presence of those who once lived and died in this historic town. These tales only contribute to the town's reputation as a place where the past is never entirely at rest. Next up today, we have Old Algiers. Just across the Mississippi River from the French Quarter, Old Algiers is one of the oldest parts of New Orleans and exudes a quaint yet mysterious charm. Its history of maritime disasters, battles, and yellow fever epidemics has given rise to numerous ghost stories. Legends tell of spirits from different eras wandering its locales, notably the haunted Algiers courthouse, where visitors often report eerie sensations and fleeting shadows that defy explanation. Similarly, at Algiers Point, the oldest part of the neighborhood, phantom footsteps and ghostly apparitions are not uncommon. Some believe these hauntings are the souls of those affected by the area's tumultuous events, unable to find peace, forever imprinting their presence on Old Algiers' historical canvas. Next up today, we have Gretna. Gretna is situated on the west bank of the Mississippi River, and it is a small town with a historic district that seems to hold secrets of the past. Among its most eerily enchanting sights is the Gretna Green Blacksmith Shop, an establishment steeped in folklore and whispered tales. Legend has it that the spirits of blacksmiths and patrons from bygone eras continue to inhabit this place, their presence felt through disembodied clanks of metal and fleeting shadows, and it's said that these spectral figures are not just remnants of the past, but guardians of stories untold, making this shop a focal point for those intrigued by the paranormal and the town's mysterious history. Next up today, we have St. Francisville. St. Francisville has definitely carved its niche in the realm of the paranormal with the infamous Myrtles Plantation, a place we have spoken about many times here on the channel, and it is often cited as one of America's most haunted homes. This grand estate is of course steeped in eerie legends and is said to be haunted by the spirits of former inhabitants who met tragic fates. Among the chilling tales are those of a young girl who appears in the windows, spectral voices that echo through the hallways at night, and inexplicable cold spots that move across rooms. Visitors and staff have reported encounters with apparitions and unexplained phenomena, only adding layers of intrigue and a lot of fear to the plantation's already dark history. Next up on our list today, we have Metairie, a suburb of New Orleans, and this place has its share of ghost stories, especially in the older parts of the town. The cemetery there has very elaborate tombs and statues, and of course, it is said to be haunted. The cemetery's atmosphere, particularly at dusk, lends itself to the spine-chilling tales recounted by those who visit. Some speak of seeing ghostly apparitions or spectral lights weaving through the tombs, while others report the unsettling feeling of being watched or followed. The intricate mausoleums and ornate statues, some of which commemorate prominent figures from Louisiana's history, seem to hold their own secrets, contributing contributing to the cemetery's mysterious aura. Legends suggest that the spirits of those interred within these grand vaults are restless, perhaps disturbed by the living or clinging to their earthly ties. Such stories have cemented the cemetery's reputation as not just a final resting place, but a locale where the past and the present, the tangible and the ethereal, eerily intersect. Next up today we have Chalmette. The Chalmette Battlefield and National Cemetery. These are the hallowed grounds where the pivotal Battle of New Orleans took place, and it holds a deep historical and supernatural resonance. The spectral encounters reported here are not just limited to visual apparitions, but many visitors claim to hear the distant clash of arms, the urgent drum beats, and the anguished cries of soldiers echoing through the turmoil of the 1815 battle. These auditory hauntings are particularly potent on foggy mornings or late evenings, creating an atmosphere that feels kind of suspended in time. Not only this, but the cemetery, final resting place for many soldiers, is said to have its own eerie ambiance. People have reported sudden temperature drops and even the feeling of being watched, suggesting that the spirits of those who fought and fell are still tethered to this place of memory and loss, especially around the anniversary of the battle. Next up today we have Jean Lafitte. Is it Jean or Jean? Let me know. This small town, named after the infamous pirate, is steeped in legends and lore, with many believing that Jean Lafitte's spirit still lingers. Locals and visitors whisper about ghostly pirates wandering the marshes, sometimes seen from the corner of the eye, vanishing when approached. The lore suggests that these ghosts are protectors of hidden treasures, still guarding their loot even in death. The dense fog that often blankets the area adds a kind of visual mystique, giving the town an almost ethereal quality at night. Amid this fog, mysterious lights are sometimes seen moving through the trees, described by some as the lanterns of Jean Lafitte's crew, searching for something lost, or perhaps signaling to lost souls. Next up today we have Thibodaux. With deep roots in the sugarcane industry, this town not only bears the scars of its tumultuous past, but also carries the weight of its ghostly legacies. The Thibodaux Massacre, an event of racial violence, is a very dark chapter in the town's history, and it is believed to have left an indelible mark on the area, with many claiming that the unrested souls of the victims still roam the town. The air seems thick with the echoes of the past, particularly at night when the boundaries between eras blur. Visitors and residents report chilling encounters with apparitions in period clothing, inexplicable sounds, and a pervasive sense of unease in certain areas. These phantoms are most often sighted near historic sites tied to the massacre, as well as along the shadowy banks of the bayous where the water whispers of old sorrows. Such tales only contribute to Thibodaux's reputation as a place where history lives on, not just in books and memories, but palpably in the very atmosphere. Moving on down today, we have Frenier. Nestled near the mysterious waters of Lake Pontchartrain, this place carries a haunting legacy amplified by its tragic history of natural disasters and eerie local folklore. The town's past is marred by catastrophic hurricanes that have decimated the community, leading to tales of lost souls and restless spirits that linger in this devastated landscape. Only adding to its mystique, Frenier is shrouded in tales of voodoo practices and curses, believed by some to be intertwined with the town's misfortunes. The desolate ghost town ambiance is palpable, with abandoned structures and overgrown vegetation reinforcing this sense of abandonment and otherworldliness. Visitors and lovers of the paranormal are drawn to Frenier's secluded setting, where the whispering winds and lapping waters seem to echo with the troubled past and spectral residents. And finally on our list today we have Mandeville. Across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans, Mandeville has its own tales of the paranormal. Among the most talked about ghostly legends is the tale of the Mandeville lakefront, where apparitions are said to wander the shores, especially on foggy nights, which seems to be a bit of a theme among these Louisiana places. Some locals recount seeing figures that suddenly vanish, leaving only footprints in the sand or the sound of disembodied whispers behind them. In the heart of Mandeville, historic buildings stand, and it's within these structures that many of the town's paranormal stories find their roots. For instance, there are accounts of spectral figures seen gazing out of windows only to disappear when approached. Others have reported unexplained sounds like footsteps or muted conversations echoing through empty rooms or hallways. These occurrences have fueled a sense of intrigue and mystery, making Mandeville a place where the past seems to intersect with the present in the most eerie of ways.
Alright, today we're doing a video all about American towns, but more specifically, creepy American towns. A creepy underbelly. They're not creepy on the outside, but they got some dark history going on. Alright, let's get right into it. We're gonna start things off with Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Pretty much every American in the audience knows exactly why this place is said to be one of the most haunted towns in the United States. Gettysburg is known for two things: its pivotal role in the American Civil War and its reputation as one of the most haunted places in the US, which those two basically go hand in hand. Back in July of 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg raged for 3 days, leaving behind a trail of devastation and death. It was one of the deadliest battles of the Civil War, with thousands of soldiers from both Union and Confederate armies losing their lives on the field. Now, fast forward to today, and you've got a town with a lot of history and a lot of ghost stories. People claim to have seen apparitions of soldiers wandering the battlefield, and then you also have all the stories about the sounds. You know, sounds of phantom gunfire and cannon blasts, or eerie drumming in the distance coming from nowhere. But the ghostly activity isn't just relegated to the battlefield. Many of the buildings in Gettysburg are said to be haunted as well. Hotels like the Farnsworth House Inn and the Gettysburg Hotel are rumored to have ghosts, and of course, some have said they've seen ghostly soldiers roaming the Gettysburg National Cemetery. Some say the sheer amount of death and suffering from that battle left a spiritual imprint, if you will, on the land, causing it to be a magnet for paranormal activity. Others think that the trauma and unfinished business of the soldiers who died there keeps them stuck between the world of the living and the dead, unable to find peace. Now we move on to Savannah, Georgia. Just like with Gettysburg, this town is well known for what went down during the Civil War, but there are lots of other dark parts about its past. Let's start with disease. Like many cities in the past, Savannah has faced outbreaks of deadly diseases, most famously yellow fever. Back in the day, the yellow fever swept through the city, taking countless lives. Then there were the fires. Savannah has experienced several devastating fires throughout its history, like the Great Savannah Fire of 1820, which destroyed a lot of the city's original buildings. And of course, there were the battles. Savannah played a big role in both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. A lot of important battles were fought here. Now, as for the hauntings themselves, well, they're everywhere. Savannah is filled with historic buildings and landmarks that are said to be haunted. Places like the Sorrel Weed House, Colonial Park Cemetery, and Moon River Brewing Company are all said to have ghosts and paranormal activity going on. Next, we have New Orleans. This is a town I've always wanted to go to. It's so full of history, so rich in culture, but part of that history is pretty dark and creepy. There are so many haunted spots, so many dark tales. We've done a whole video on haunted places in New Orleans alone. Definitely check that video out. But after this one, of course, a few heavy hitters are the Lalaurie Mansion, the former home of an evil French socialite named Delphine Lalaurie, who fled the city after it was discovered she'd tormented and mutilated several slaves she owned, performing twisted experiments on them. Pretty much every cemetery in New Orleans is said to be haunted as well, especially St. Louis Cemetery, and of course, you have all the history involving voodoo. Not saying the practice is evil by any means, but it does add to the general spookiness and vibe of the town. Next on the list, we have the town of St. Elmo. St. Elmo in Chappie County, Colorado, now sits completely abandoned. But in its heyday, it was a bustling mining town filled with dreams of gold and silver. Founded in the late 1800s, St. Elmo was your standard town for the time. You had general stores, saloons, but as the mining started to dry up over the years, so did the town's population. And by the 1920s, it it was practically a ghost town. And I say practically because it wasn't completely abandoned. Meet Annabelle Stark, better known as Dirty Annie, a woman who refused to leave St. Elmo. Alongside her brother Tony, who grappled with mental health issues, Annabelle was one of the last residents of the town, which, with each passing year and dwindling community, Tony's mental state started spiraling further into isolation-induced madness, often seen wandering the desolate streets lost in his own thoughts. The two were surrounded by decaying buildings and homes, but Annabelle was determined to cling to their family home and the memories that it held. And some say that as the town emptied, Annabelle and Tony were the sole inhabitants. And today, when you visit the ghost town, it's said you just might see the ghostly presence of Dirty Annie, still wandering the empty, moonlit streets, guarding the town from the afterlife. Next up, we have Bannack, Montana. This place might look like your average ghost town now, but back in the day, it was anything but ordinary. Founded in 1862 when gold was discovered in Grasshopper Creek, it quickly became the very definition of a Wild West town, attracting a whole lot of folks hoping to strike it rich. But where there's gold, there's usually trouble. And Bannack was no exception. The place was full of shootouts, stagecoach robberies. Just picture the type of place from old Western movies where one guy punches another guy in a saloon and then everyone in the whole place starts beating each other up for no apparent reason. The place was so corrupt and crime-filled that even the town's sheriff, Henry Plummer, was secretly leading a gang of outlaws. But folks in Bannack weren't about to sit back and let these outlaws run the show. They had enough of the lawlessness, so they formed what they called the Vigilance Committee. And one night they rounded up over 20 members of the gang, including Plummer himself, and strung them up. Didn't really solve the problem as more outlaws rolled in, but as the gold started to run out and people moved on to other mining opportunities, Bannack faded into history. And these days, it's a ghost town in every sense of the word. Over 60 historic buildings are still standing, and as you can probably guess, yes, the place is said to be haunted. Jerome, Arizona. At one point, Jerome was a bustling mining town, buzzing with activity, teeming with miners, but there was also a lot of tragedy here. Jerome had its fair share of accidents, mine collapses, explosions, and where there's danger and tragedy, there's often said to be ghosts. Today, Jerome is known as one of the most haunted towns in America. People claim to have seen all sorts of stuff. Ghostly apparitions wandering the streets to strange lights flickering in the abandoned mines. One of the most famous haunted spots in Jerome is the Jerome Grand Hotel. Back in the day, it was a hospital for miners, and it's said to be haunted by the spirits of those who died there. Guests report hearing strange noises, feeling cold spots, and even seeing apparitions in the hallways. And it just wouldn't feel right talking about towns in North America with dark histories without bringing up Salem, Massachusetts. This place has such a dark history behind it that just the name alone, Salem, is just ominous. It evokes these feelings in you. The Salem witch trials are one of the darkest chapters in American history, and part of what makes the whole conundrum so creepy is that it kind of popped up out of nowhere. Witch trials had been a thing for hundreds of years in Europe, but they'd started to wane at this point in the late 1600s. Some of these superstitious beliefs carried over with settlers in the States though, and when young girls in the village started acting strange, having fits, screaming and saying they were being tormented by witches, things quickly spiraled out of control. The accusations spread very fast, like wildfire, and soon dozens of people, mostly women, but also some men, were accused of being witches. People were just pointing fingers left and right, making baseless claims. Anyone who seemed just a little different or rubbed someone the wrong way could find themselves in serious trouble if they were accused of witchcraft. And how do you really prove someone is a witch? You don't. It was just people's word against each other's. And in the end, 19 people were hanged and some died while awaiting trial. It's one of the worst cases of mass hysteria and paranoia in history. Alright, it's me, James, or aka Mr. Ohio, because I get all the Ohio videos for some reason. And today, we're focusing on some of the creepiest towns y'all got out there. Alright, let's get right into it. We're gonna start the list with Waynesville, Ohio. This is said to be one of the most haunted towns in the state, which is saying a lot for Ohio. Waynesville, Ohio is founded way back in 1797, and it has quite the history and its fair share of spooky stories. So sure, folks flock here for the antiques and the annual Sauerkraut Festival, but it's also known as a haunt for ghost hunters. You'll hear some odd sounds in the old buildings. You'll see shadowy figures peeking out of windows. With more than 15 spots rumored to be haunted, Waynesville has no shortage of creepy tales, like the Hamel House Inn, for example. Staff here have reported seeing a mysterious man in room 4, and some say a young salesman vanished there ages ago, possibly meeting a dark end. Then there's the Stetson House, where Louisa Stetson, Lyric, supposedly still roams, dressed to the nines in old-fashioned gear. There's also the former Friends boarding home, now a museum, where you might hear the sounds of ladies bustling about as if they're cooking up a storm, even though there's no kitchen anymore. Now we move on to Mansfield, Ohio. This place isn't just said to be haunted by, lame ghosts who will just pass right through your body if they ever try to punch you. It's also haunted by a big, scary, hairy, orange-eyed beast referred to as Orange Eyes, and you wouldn't want to get punched by Orange Eyes. But let's start with the haunted stuff. One of the most famous haunted locations in Mansfield is the Ohio State Reformatory, known for its imposing architecture and eerie atmosphere. Once a prison, the reformatory is said to be haunted by the spirits of former inmates who suffered under harsh conditions. Visitors have reported strange noises, apparitions, and unsettling feelings while exploring it. And aside from the reformatory, Mansfield is also home to, again, tales of a cryptid known as the Orange Eyes, described as a creature with glowing orange eyes and a menacing presence. Sightings of the Orange Eyes have been reported in the wooded areas surrounding the city. Some believe it to be a Bigfoot-like creature. Others think it could be paranormal in some way. Some even believe it to be extraterrestrial in origin. Next up, we have Boston Mills, aka Helltown. This is kind of like the Chernobyl of Ohio. So Helltown, Ohio, within the boundaries of Boston Township, is full, and I do mean full, of eerie legends and ghost stories. It was once a thriving community known as Boston Mills, but this area faced an abrupt evacuation in the early 70s at the hands of the US government, purportedly to establish the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Now, the empty homes, the abandoned buildings, and desolate streets that are left behind have this eerie vibe about them. You see, some locals insist that the evacuation wasn't solely because of the government's land claim. There are stories about much darker reasons. Apparently there was toxic contamination, with contaminants seeping into the soil. There are also stories about mutated animals and even people lingering around in the old abandoned homes. Not only that, but after the evacuation happened, there are said to have been satanic rituals carried out in the abandoned town. So, lots going on. Next up, we have Athens, Ohio, which has multiple haunted spots. There's a haunted abandoned asylum, a haunted cemetery, even the university is haunted. And there's more cemeteries which are also all haunted. Every place in this town has ghosts. Half the population who lives here aren't even alive. Now, the haunted reputation mostly comes from its history with the former Athens Lunatic Asylum, now known as the Ridges, which is actually part of Ohio University's campus. The asylum's grounds still have old cemeteries where former patients were buried. One of the creepiest stories about the asylum is the story of Margaret Schilling. She was a former resident who died in the attic in 1979, and she was left there for so long that her decomposing body left a stain on the floor that remains to this very day. Wilson Hall, a dorm on Ohio University's campus, is rumored to be built on top of an old cemetery. The 4th floor of Wilson Hall is said to be haunted, with reports of apparitions, strange noises, and slamming doors. There's also a rumor about a student who took their own life in one of the rooms there. In addition to the Ridges and Wilson Hall, several cemeteries in the Athens area are rumored to be haunted, including Sims, Haynes, Hanning, Cuckler, Higgins, Zion, Hunter, Slaughter, quite the name for a cemetery, Cutler, Mansfield, and Peach Ridge Cemetery. Some say these cemeteries are actually arranged in the shape of a pentagram, with Wilson Hall right at the center. Next we have Kirtland, Ohio, which doesn't have much of a reputation of being haunted itself. What it does have, though, is a reputation for mutated creatures that are said to stalk the forests. Creatures known as melonheads. Deep within its dense forests are tales of the mysterious and eerie creatures known as the melonheads. According to local lore, the melonheads are said to be humanoid beings with these abnormally large, bulbous, hairless heads, resembling melons. I picture them kind of looking a bit like Hey Arnold, which would be a lot less cute in real life. These elusive creatures are rumored to lurk in the shadows of the forests, emerging only under cover of darkness to stalk unsuspecting travelers. Now, there are a few different versions of the melonhead's tale, but the most well-known story or explanation for these creatures was that a mad doctor was conducting unethical experiments on a bunch of orphans. Experiments which caused their bulbous craniums to take shape. At one point, the orphans got fed up with being experimented on, and they hated their melon bulbous dumb heads, and they banded together, killing the mad scientist before setting his home on fire and running off into the woods. Sightings and encounters of melon heads, though, continue to be reported to this day. Cleveland is also said to have some creepy paranormal stuff going on, mostly from the supposedly haunted Franklin Castle, which is said to be Ohio's most haunted house. The Franklin Castle is a towering structure with a dark and mysterious past. Built in the late 19th century, Franklin Castle has long been rumored to be haunted by restless spirits. Stories of tragedy, death, and mystery surround it. Legend has it that the castle's original owner, Haynes Tideman, suffered multiple personal losses within its walls, leading to rumors of curses and supernatural stuff going on. Pretty soon after his family moved in, Tideman's mother died. His sister then died of diabetes, and over the next 3 years, more and more of his siblings died prematurely. Only 2 of the 6 actually made it to adulthood, so it's really no wonder why the place is said to have some darkness lingering in it. Over the years, visitors and residents have reported strange sounds, apparitions, and unexplained phenomena within the castle. Despite renovations and changes in ownership, one thing has always stayed the same: the paranormal activity. Next up on the list is Put-in Bay. Now, Put-in Bay, Ohio may be known for its sunny shores and summer fun, but lurking beneath the surface, there's some creepy stuff going on. From what I've read, there are 3 major haunted hotspots. First up, we have the Park Hotel. This hotel has stood since the late 1800s, and it's seen its fair share of guests come and go. Also means there's a lot of history, some of it dark. Some visitors have reported more than just creaky floorboards and old-fashioned charm. Rumor has it that the Park Hotel is haunted by the ghost of a young woman who tragically fell to her death from one of the upper floors. Guests have reported strange noises, flickering lights, and even sightings of a figure wandering the halls late at night. Next, there's the Dollar House, a Victorian mansion. Legend has it that the original owner, Valentine Dollar, was involved in some shady dealings during Prohibition, including smuggling alcohol and hiding it in secret passages throughout the house, and today visitors claim to hear whispers and footsteps echoing through the empty rooms, as if the ghosts of Dollar's past are still lingering within the walls. Then there's the Crow's Nest, a historic home that sits on a cliff overlooking Lake Erie. This mansion was once owned by Jay Cook, a banker and financier, but there's a tragic tale of one of Cook's daughters that's left its mark on the property. The story goes that the young girl fell to her death from one of the windows, and her ghost is said to still haunt the grounds, appearing as a fleeting figure in white. Moving on to Marietta, Ohio next, a charming town that also has its fair share of ghost stories, and most of the scary stuff happens at Hotel Lafayette. This hotel was built in the late 1800s. Over the years, guests and staff reported strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena while staying there, leading many to believe that the hotel is haunted by spirits. One of the most famous ghostly residents of the Hotel Lafayette is said to be a woman named Sarah, who reportedly took her own life in one of the rooms, and guests have reported hearing disembodied cries, footsteps, and even seeing apparitions wandering the halls late at night. Others have claimed to feel an eerie presence or sudden drops in temperature, but Sarah isn't the only ghost rumored to haunt the Hotel Lafayette. Some guests have reported encountering the spirit of a young girl who plays tricks on unsuspecting visitors by moving objects or flickering lights. A real brat of a ghost. But at least she's still having fun in the afterlife, so props to her. Next up, we have another kind of Chernobyl-like Ohio small town, Cheshire. Only a handful of people still call this place home. At one time, this was a bustling town, but barely anyone lives there at this point, and that's because of the environmental hazards caused by a nearby power plant. The plant emitted a thick, sooty residue and chemical fogs that would blanket the town sporadically. Obviously, not at all safe for residents to live in that kind of condition, so many abandoned their homes and started new lives in other places. Eventually, the power company responsible for the pollution was compelled to just buy out the entire town. But finally, we have the abandoned town of Moonville. Love that name, Moonville. This is a ghost town with only a few traces left behind: a cemetery, some foundations, and a desolate railroad tunnel. But what sets Moonville apart are the chilling tales that surround its abandoned tunnel. Stories that have been passed down for decades. One of the most famous specters haunting Moonville is that of Theodore Lawhead, the unfortunate engineer whose spirit is said to roam the tracks. Back in the 1880s, Lawhead met a tragic end when his train collided head-on with another. Now visitors report sightings of a ghostly figure with a lantern in his hand pacing along the track and disappearing into the tunnel. Then there's the story of the Brakeman, a ghost believed to be that of a young man who met his demise after a night of heavy drinking. Legend has it that he fell asleep on the tracks, never to awaken again because he was too sauced to wake up before a train ran him over. Then there's the Lavender Lady. Some say they've seen a frail elderly woman walking near the tunnel only for her to vanish into thin air, leaving behind the lingering sense of lavender. Some say she's the spirit of Mary Shea or Shay, who met her end on those very tracks. There's also the spirit known as the Bully, believed to be the restless spirit of Baldy Keaton, a Moonville resident who liked a good old fist fight. The tale goes that after a scuffle at the saloon, Baldy was found dead on the tracks. As for how he died, no one knows for sure, but now his ghost is said to loom above the tunnel, glaring at unsuspecting visitors and even pelting them with stones.
Now it's considered a ghost town, overgrown by trees, but it's really empty.
Michigan State Police tells us the woman was in her 20s when she walked away from family and never returned.
America, we're coming back at you right again. We're coming for you. More small American towns, this time with secrets, unsolved mysteries.
Yeah.
We're on the case. We're not actually going to solve anything. We're just bringing you the information about
But maybe you can solve them, and if you do, you know what to do.
Exactly. And we're starting off the list with the town of Holmen in Wisconsin. This small village has a story about one of the wildest cryptids in the United States, the man-bat. Unfortunately, it's not Batman. This is a large, half-man, half-bat looking creature, far less friendly. Actually, there is a man-bat in the actual Batman. It's a bit more like that, the villain, the scary monster guy. So this story goes that on a September night in 2006, a father and son had a terrifying run-in with what they described as a man-bat while driving down Briggs Road at night. Traveling in their truck, the pair spotted a massive figure hurtling towards them in the darkness. The father swerved to try and avoid colliding with the thing, and the creature abruptly changed course, flying up into the sky with a piercing shriek. Now, immediately afterward, both men were overcome by this sudden and severe illness, forcing them to pull over and vomit. Now, some say that has something to do with the creature. I don't know, it was maybe emitting something into the air. I just think they saw something really wild and it was overwhelming. I'd probably be barfing after seeing something like that. A giant winged creature flying towards my car. I almost just died. They described the creature to authorities, saying it was 6 to 7 feet tall with leathery bat-like wings, clawed appendages, and glowing yellow eyes. Some speculate that this bat creature could somehow be linked to the infamous Mothman, or that it's potentially even just the same creature.
Next up, we've got Saxtown, more like Axetown, a small town located just outside of Millstadt in Illinois. In 1847, the town was comprised of mostly German immigrants, and on March 19th of that same year, one of them, Fritz Stelzeride, was killed. After responding to a knock on the front door of his farmhouse, he was struck down with an axe. The killer then entered the home and killed his father, his mother, his grandfather, and his siblings, all with the same weapon. The bodies were found by Stelzeride's neighbors neighbor who got suspicious when he didn't see anyone working on the farm that day. He discovered the disheveled bodies with their throats gouged from end to end. No one knows who the killer was or what their motivation was for ending the lives of an entire family in such a gruesome way. One theory, however, is that the family had been hiding gold on the property, but this was never proved because the existence, or the absence, of the money was never proved. Another theory is that a family member did the killing so that they would become the sole heir to the inheritance, a theory backed by the fact that after the killings, the one remaining member of the family, who had not been on the farm that day, as far as we know, fled the country and changed his name. But again, if someone is targeting Stills rides, it's probably best not to be one, so his logic could come from somewhere else.
Moving on to Woodland Park in Teller County, Colorado. Now, we have a very unsettling and tragic case involving a young man named Joshua Maddox. So in 2008, a man named Chuck Murphy was demolishing his old wood cabin when he came across something incredibly disturbing. It was the remains of Joshua Maddox, a young man who had been missing for 7 years at that point. He'd been stuck in the chimney. Now, it's pretty obvious that he died in the chimney, but there's always been this mystery as to why he was in there in the first place. Joshua was last seen alive in May of 2008 when he left his family's home to take a walk, but he never returned. Joshua seemed to have vanished without a trace. Then, in 2015, he was found lodged in the chimney of the cabin. This was the last place anyone was expecting to find him, which is why he was found completely by accident. So now people were wondering what happened to him during those years that he was missing. Some think there may have been foul play involved, that someone had forced him into that chimney. Others think he'd just been maybe up on the roof of the cabin for whatever reason and then had an accident.
Next up, we have the mystery of the Below killings, which took place in Windsor, North Carolina in 1993, back when the town had a population of just 4,000 people. So small, yes. Mysterious, also yes. On June 6, a man armed with various weapons entered the local Below grocery after hours. There were 6 employees in the building, all doing their closing duties when the man arrived, and using his handheld projectile weapon, he led them all into the meat cutting room in the back. He bound their hands with duct tape and then stacked the employees 2 by 2 before firing his weapons at all 6. He then grabbed a meat cleaver and used it to impale the bodies numerous times, again and again, until the blade actually broke off into one of the victims' backs. Super disgusting, but surprisingly, after the attack, one of the victims was able to break free and call the police. Even more surprising, 3 of the employees actually survived the attack as well. The surviving employees were able to give a description of the man to police, but neither could figure out who committed the heinous crime, why, and where they are now. But the police did say it was malicious and thought out. There's currently a $30,000 reward for any information that can lead to the arrest of the assailant, so if you know anything, give the Windsor, North Carolina police a call and leave a comment.
Next on the list is the Jamison family case. In October of 2009, Bobby Jamison, his wife Sherilyn, and their daughter Madison disappeared from their home in Oklahoma. They were last seen alive on their home surveillance system footage, making trips between their vehicle and their home, packing to leave, in what authorities described as this very odd, almost trance-like state. Their abandoned truck was discovered days later in Latimer County, Oklahoma, with their malnourished dog inside and important belongings like their ID cards, their wallets, phones, a GPS system, and a large stack of cash. The family had been considering purchasing a plot of land nearby at the time of their disappearance. But it wasn't until November of 2013 that the skeletal remains of 2 adults and their daughter were found by hunters in a remote area of Latimer County, less than 3 miles from where the truck was abandoned. The remains were confirmed to belong to the Jamison family. The exact cause of death couldn't be determined because of how advanced the decomposition was. So the case is still completely unsolved.
Next up, we have the mystery of the vanishing Iowa town of Erkhammer. In 1928, the town was small but thriving. It was well kept and growing. The grass was always mowed, the roads were always clean, and ever so often new buildings would pop up as well. Pretty normal town, right? Well, things started to get weird when an aerial photo taken of the town painted an almost opposite picture of what could be seen from the point of view of someone on the ground. The town looked abandoned and disheveled. The grass looked overgrown and unkempt. A weird photo is weird, but many people did their best to believe that the image was the result of a messed up camera lens or something of the sort. But then things got weirder. During a road trip, an American man had stopped to fill up his gas tank in the town, but when he drove away, he realized that his tank had never been filled up, and so he drove back to get the gas that he paid for. He ran out of gas before he could reach the town, but he could see it and it didn't look far, so he got out of his car and began walking and walking and walking. He never made it. No one knows what happened to the town. Some believe it chipped away bit by bit, and others claim that it vanished into thin air out of the blue one afternoon.
Alright, next we have the case of Jessica Chambers. This one is pretty distressing. So this happened in Cortland, Mississippi. It's still one of the most baffling cases in the state. Just after 8 p.m. on December 6th, 2014, the body of a burning woman was found next to her car, which was also on fire. It was Jessica Chambers. She was still alive and told first responders that a man named Eric, or Derek, had set her on fire. She was rushed to the hospital where she died the following morning from her burns. Now here are the events that led up to her being found. She spent the morning with friends before heading to her mother Lisa's house, where she took a nap. Later in the afternoon, she received a text message and left her mother's house, mentioning that she was going to grab something to eat and clean out her car. Around 5:30 p.m., Jessica was spotted at a gas station, approximately 1.5 miles from where her body would later be discovered. This was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Location data from her phone indicated that she'd traveled to nearby Batesville around 6 p.m. She returned to Cortland around 6:30 p.m. At about 6:45, she made a call to her mother, who noted that the call was unusually quiet. This was just 15 minutes before Jessica drove to the area where her body was found. At 7:30 p.m., she arrived at the location where, tragically, she lost her life about 30 minutes later. Nobody knew who this Eric or Derek could have been. Everyone with those names in the surrounding area was questioned, but they were all ruled out. The case is still a complete mystery.
Next up, we have the Gurdon Light, which can be found in Gurdon, Arkansas, or Arkansas if you're James. He'll never live that down, guys. The light appears floating over the town's railroad tracks. It's eerie, ominous, and it glows a bright bluish white and sometimes has a bit of an orange tint. While the light might sound like some kind of ghost story or urban legend, it's actually not. It's a real phenomenon that occurs on a regular basis and that has been witnessed by hundreds of people, and maybe you if you decide to go visit. But still, no one knows why this light appears. There have been, of course, speculative ghost stories. Some people believe that one day, many years ago, a worker was killed on the train tracks and lost his head, and the light is the worker trying to find it again. Others believe he was killed by a co-worker with either a hammer or railroad spike, and some people believe in a much more scientific explanation. Kind of. Underground quartz crystals in the area that are under constant stress cause an electric reaction that results in the glow. Is that true? We don't know. There's not really a lot of scientific evidence to back the scientific theory up. Quotations, of course. The light is always there, but it's only visible at night. Some people believe it to be swamp fog, but that also doesn't make sense. Whole lot of theories for this one, but no real answers. If you have a theory, why not add it to the already very long list down below.
Now we move on to Longview, Texas to discuss a mysterious entity that's said to lurk in the Gregg County Historical Museum. This eerie presence lurks on the second floor, where a century-old iron coffin holds a haunting secret. Larry Corrington, a member of the board of directors, has spent a long time volunteering at the museum and has experienced some pretty unsettling stuff. According to him, while he works downstairs, he sometimes hears this distinct sound of small footsteps echoing near the coffin upstairs, and he's not the only one who's heard them either. Other volunteers have also reported hearing these phantom footsteps. The origins of the iron coffin date back to the 1880s when it was discovered near downtown Longview. Inside the coffin were the remarkably preserved remains of a young girl. It's believed that she passed away while on vacation, and her family, unable to transport her body back home to West Texas, chose to lay her to rest in the iron coffin. Now, the girl's remains were reinterred at Greenwood Cemetery, but the coffin itself found its way to the Gregg County Historical Museum in 1980, where it's been ever since.
Next up, we've got the Well to Hell, located in the back of an old graveyard in Sabattis, Maine. In 1956, it is said that a local boy had been dared by his friends to descend into the well. The young men were in high spirits, making jokes as their friend began his descent into the well. Well, they lowered him down using a rope, but when he reached the bottom, his friends assumed he would call up or yank the rope to signal that he wished to be lifted back out, but there was nothing. Just silence and no sign of movement. Eventually the friends took initiative and dragged the boy back up from the well, but as he emerged from the darkness, he looked like a completely different person. His hair had gone white, his eyes appeared as though they had lost what was human about them. It was like he had aged and completely changed in a matter of minutes, and not only that, but he had gone mad. He was unable to respond when his friends asked him what happened in the well. After the incident, he was confined to a mental institution and he never spoke another word ever again, but he would occasionally scream in terror. What happened in the well that day, no one knows. No one's been able to figure it out, what goes on down there, but I think a pretty good theory is that it was, in fact, a well to hell.
All 4 women were found in an area off Calder Road in League City in the mid-'80s and early '90s.
I think Clyde is still extremely dangerous. I don't think there's any way possible that Clyde is finished doing what he's accused of doing in the past.
There's some disturbing things hiding in these small towns, and we are here to share them with you, so let's find out.
Your town might be on the list. Get ready. Elmendorf, Texas was the home of Joe Ball, who committed a series of gruesome crimes in the 30s. So this is an absolutely insane case here. I'm sure viewers from Texas are very familiar with Joe Ball, but I'd never heard of this story, and I'm pretty surprised that it's not more well known. So Joe Ball was a serial killer. He has a couple interesting nicknames, the Butcher of Elmendorf and the Alligator Man, both of which fit. He fought in World War I, and when he returned to Texas, he started making money as a bootlegger. Then, when Prohibition ended, he opened a saloon. At the back, he built a pond where he kept 6 alligators. He'd often feed live cats and dogs to the gators, but that didn't satisfy him for long. Soon, women in the area started going missing, including his own wife. Now, in 1938, 2 county sheriffs arrived at his property to question him about several of these missing women, and Ball pulled out a pistol and took his own life. But a handyman of Joe's, Clifford Wheeler, told authorities about how he'd assisted Ball in disposing of the bodies of 2 women who he'd killed, feeding them to his alligators. It's believed Joe Ball may have taken the lives of at least 20 women.
Next up, we have a small town in Texas that was once home to a lesser known but incredibly gruesome serial killer, Henry Lee Lucas, who claims to have killed over 3,000 individuals during his criminal career, which spanned from the 1960s all the way into the 1980s. Also known as the Confession Killer or Highway Stalker, Lee Lucas was born in Blacksford, Virginia, and at a young age lost his father to hypothermia, and so his mother was forced to raise him on her own. Clearly, Henry wasn't happy with this, as his mother was the first person he killed in 1960 in Michigan. He was sent to prison but only served 10 years due to overcrowding. And that's when he moved to Ringgold, Texas with his niece Frida Powell to work for a sick woman named Katie Rich, both of whom he would later kill. While he claimed to have ended the lives of thousands of individuals through restricting airways, impaling them with sharp objects, blunt force, and hit and runs, he was convicted of only 11 killings.
Texarkana is home to one of the creepiest cases in the state's history, the Texarkana Moonlight Killer case. So this case was heavy inspiration for slasher movies that would come years later, along with tons of urban legends. The killer literally wore a sack with holes cut out for his eyes and would attack innocent couples while their cars were parked in an area called Lover's Lane. It's about as classic as it gets. So the first attack happened on February 22nd, 1946. A young couple, Jimmy Hollisand and his girlfriend Mary Jean Larry, were attacked by a man with a pillowcase over his head carrying a firearm. Jimmy was pistol whipped and very injured, and Mary was attacked, but the 2 lived. Many of the other victims wouldn't be so lucky though. He would attack 6 other people, and it all happened in a period of 10 weeks. the assailant became known as the Phantom of Texarkana, and the case was never solved.
Regular hospitals are bad enough, but abandoned and haunted hospitals definitely take the cake, so of course we had to include at least one on today's list. The Yorktown Memorial Hospital, located in Yorktown, Texas, between San Antonio and the Gulf Coast. It was built in 1951 to house and treat those suffering from substance abuse. When the hospital was abandoned in 1980, the living residents and staff members exited the building. But what about those who died during their time in the hospital? Well, it's said that they still inhabit the premises to this day. And no, I'm not talking about 1 or 2 patients who died while under the hospital's care. I'm talking about thousands, over 2,000 to be exact. So really, it's no wonder the place is extremely haunted. Honestly, I'm surprised it didn't open up some kind of gateway to hell and land a spot on the list in our last video. Check it out if you'd like. Those who have entered the building have reported feeling a strange rotting sensation and claim that they can feel the tormented soul's energies in the walls. Not only that, but many people have said they've heard screams and disembodied voices while inside, as well as seeing strange floating lights in the hallways, despite the fact that the building is ancient and has no electricity. If you've been, let me know your experience.
Now we move on to Kerrville, Texas, with the case of Janine Jones, a nurse who also terrorized San Antonio. What an absolute creep this woman is. Yes, she is still alive. She took the lives of an estimated 60 young patients in her care between 1970 and 1982. She'd inject patients with a variety of substances that would cause cardiac arrest. She first started working as a licensed vocational nurse at Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. But hospital staff started realizing that an abnormal amount of young patients were dying in Jones's care. Now, here's where things get really infuriating. An investigation could have been carried out right there and then, and things could have ended here. But the hospital didn't want any negative attention, and they certainly did not want to be sued. So instead of alerting authorities, they asked all of their current LVNs to resign and then rehired exclusively registered nurses to take control of the pediatric ICU. This meant that Jones could just move on and start working at another hospital, which she did. So more young patients died at her hands at a pediatrician's clinic in Kerrville. There, a doctor finally found she'd been accessing lethal amounts of succinylmethonium chloride. So in 1985, she was finally convicted and is now serving life in prison.
Circling right on back to Yorktown, it appears as though this particular town is home to not only an incredibly haunted hospital, but also an incredibly disturbing creature known as a Wendigo. Although the creature is best described in Algonquin folklore, which is Canadian for my Americans on this channel, many locals of the town claim to have seen one of the beasts. Many people have compared the Wendigo to a skinwalker, as it is tall and lanky and somewhat humanoid, but can shapeshift and has been known to devour human flesh. And when a Wendigo finds the body of a deceased hiker, it will often inhabit it, and then turn to killing those who attempt to come into contact with its human exterior. Many people also claim to have seen the demon take the form of animals and follow and stalk them throughout the area. Stay safe out there in Wendigo.
Speaking of creepy creatures, Texas is also home to an entity known as Goatman, who stalks the old Alton Bridge connecting Denton and Copper Canyon. So the tale traces back to a black goat farmer named Oscar Washburn, who'd moved his family near the bridge. And Washburn earned a reputation as a very reliable businessman and was nicknamed the Goatman by locals. He even hung a sign on Alton Bridge pointing towards his home, proudly declaring, "This way to the Goatman." But in 1938, members of the local government who had ties to the Ku Klux Klan kidnapped Washburn from his family. They took him to the bridge, hung a noose around his neck, and threw him over the side. When they looked down expecting to see him dead though, they found the noose completely empty. Now, locals warn that crossing the bridge at night without headlights, just as the Klansmen did, will summon the Goatman. People crossing the bridge will claim to spot ghostly figures, mysterious lights coming from the woods, and even physical encounters like being touched, grabbed, or having rocks thrown at them. from some unseen force, or of course a half-man, half-goat monster.
Next up, surprise, surprise, it's another creepy hospital. Worley Hospital in Pampa, Texas. The institution was opened in 1928 but closed its doors in the 1970s due to lack of revenue. After 40 years of sitting abandoned, the building has become quite a talking point for the town's locals, who claim that it is haunted by patients who died within its walls during its 42 years of operation. After many townspeople reported seeing a black silhouette in the window of the abandoned building, ghost hunters began to take interest. Those who have entered have been greeted with decrepit and decaying walls, ceilings, and floors that have been heavily vandalized. But it appears as though trespassers aren't the only ones to make their way through the empty halls of the once surgically specialized facility. Many of the patients who died within the building's walls, as well as a 25-year-old nurse who was poisoned while working at the hospital, are said to roam the grounds. People have reported seeing demonic creatures stalking them while exploring the floors of the hospitals, with the majority of the activity taking place on the 3rd floor, where surgeries would have been performed when the hospital was running. Oh, and the current owner of the grounds wants to renovate the building into a ministry. Coincidence? I do not think so.
League City, Texas is home to an area known as the Killing Fields. So there is an abnormally large list of people who have been found dead in this stretch of land surrounding Interstate Highway 45. And there are also a number of people who've gone missing from this area and have still yet to be found. And out of more than 30 cases, only a small handful have ever been solved. The place is such a hotspot for mysterious deaths that a task force, Operation HALT, was set up just to investigate these incidents alone. The first cases started cropping up in the 70s with the discovery of multiple bodies scattered throughout the area, and over the decades, law enforcement agencies have recovered the remains of numerous people, many of them young women. And it's not even clear if there's just one assailant responsible, a group, or if the area is just an ideal spot to kind of get rid of evidence. We really don't know. It's a complete mystery to this day.
And finally, we have a man with a thing for eyes. Stealing them, that is. It all started in the 1990s in a rural area of Dallas. Is it a town? Not really, but this case is pure evil, so listen up. During the 90s, SEX workers began turning up dead at an alarming rate, with one very striking thing in common. You guessed it, their eyes had been completely removed from their sockets. The killer was Charles Albright, also known as the Eyeball Killer. When he was young, Charles had quite the knack for taxidermy. He would stuff many animals a week, doing his best to make them look pristine, but there was one thing missing: eyes. His mother refused to buy glass eyes for the animals, and so instead Charles would use buttons. When he got a little older, he slept with an SEX worker, which led to him getting a transmitted infection. I feel like the pieces are starting to come together. His obsession with the eyes and his hatred for women of this certain profession grew exponentially over the years, and on December 13th of 1990, he took his first life. After violating the woman, he fired a projectile from a handheld weapon, execution style, into the back of her head and carefully removed the eyes of the victim with what has been described as surgical precision. Charles was convicted of 1 killing, but most likely committed at least 3. He was sentenced to death and was executed in August of 2020.
Ohio, it's a wild state, and I'm back to talk more about it. I've gone through the comments. You guys left some great suggestions down there, so I'm going to be covering some of those today. So your town might be on here. I don't know if that's going to be a good thing for you or not. We're going to kick things off with Loveland. How on earth did I not put Loveland, Ohio in part 1? Loveland is home to one of the strangest creatures said to stalk the state, the Loveland frog. But it's also home to a supposedly haunted castle. Loveland Castle was constructed by Harry Andrews. Very interesting man this guy was. He had a lot of interest in knights and medieval lore. Andrews was born in 1890. He worked as a medic during World War I. He then contracted meningitis during the war and was believed to be dead. His body was actually moved to the morgue, like he was done. But when his body was taken back to the hospital to be dissected, the doctors were like, hey, you know what, why not? Let's just see if we can get his heart beating again with adrenaline. Miraculously, it worked. Andrews, who'd now spent a whole bunch of time in Europe and then almost died, was now even more into medieval history and returned home with this newfound determination to build his very own castle. Eventually, he constructed Loveland Castle along the banks of the Little Miami River. Andrews then moved into the castle, where he lived until he died in 1981. Today, the castle is the headquarters for the Knights of the Golden Trail, an organization Andrews started dedicated to upholding the principles of knighthood, but Harry Andrews' spirit is said to still roam the castle grounds. Objects will mysteriously disappear or move, and voices are heard echoing through the corridors. And as I said at the top, of course, Loveland's supernatural reputation doesn't end with this castle. One of the most famous legends is that of the Loveland Frog, or frogs. There have been multiple large frog-like creatures spotted near the Little Miami River over the years. Next up, we have Ashtabula, which is said to be haunted by the spirits of a tragic train disaster. So on December 29, 1876, the Pacific Express No. 5 crossed the Ashtabula Bridge, but because of particularly cold weather and structural weaknesses, the bridge collapsed, sending the train plummeting into the icy river below, and in the end, 98 people died. The scene must have been absolutely horrific, with rail cars crashing into each other and igniting in flame, and firefighters were unable to put out the flames, so people just cried out in pain and horror as they were consumed by fire, trapped in the wreckage. It was one of the worst rail accidents in US history, and the screams of those victims still haunt the area to this day. Some say you can occasionally hear them above the rush of the river. The Chestnut Grove Cemetery holds the remains of 19 of these victims, but their spirits are said to be very much active. Visitors to the cemetery have reported seeing ghostly apparitions. But along with the victims of the tragedy, there's also said to be the ghost of Charles Collins, one of the developers of the bridge. Witnesses claim to have seen his guilty spirit weeping at the sight of the tragedy or crying over people's graves. Some claim to see tiny lights even hovering below the new bridge where the old one once stood. Rogues Hollow near Doylestown, Ohio has its fair share of spooky tales as well. It's said that a mill worker died in a pretty gruesome manner, getting crushed by the mill wheel, and now his spirit is said to guard the area, keeping outsiders at bay. Then there's the eerie tale of the headless horse and the ghost oak tree. So at one time there was a large oak tree near Route 65, and one of its branches hung so low that riders on horseback had to duck as they passed under it. Well, one story goes that the branch was weighed down extra low with ice, and a poor horse just ran into it at top speed, lobbing off its head. From that point on, riders passing the area late at night would occasionally come across a devilish figure riding a ghostly headless horse. Next up, we have Oxford, Ohio, which has one of the coolest ghosts, a phantom motorcyclist. So the story goes that back in the 40s, there was this farmer's daughter. She was head over heels for this guy who was a bit of a James Dean type, leather jacket, motorcycle, very rebellious. Also a lot like me, minus the motorcycle, the leather jacket, and the rebellious part. His name was James, that's the similarity. And her father was not too thrilled about their relationship. He thought the guy was trouble, and he probably wasn't wrong. He forbade his daughter from seeing him. So to avoid her father's disapproval, they met up in complete secret, usually late at night when the coast was clear. And when it was, the girlfriend would flash the porch light 3 times as a signal for him to come over. Well, one night, the boyfriend decided he wanted to take their relationship to the next level and propose. He saw the 3 flashes and revved up his motorcycle, racing towards her house to pop the question, but as soon as he sped down the road, he lost control of his bike, crashing into a barbed wire fence. And ever since, people claim they've seen this mysterious light flickering in the distance along the road where he crashed, said to be the spirit of the phantom motorcyclist, still trying to reach his girl's house to ask for her hand in marriage. Next on the list is Chillicothe, where there were a series of mysterious disappearances between 2014 and 2015. Now, it all began in the spring of 2014 when Charlotte Trago vanished without a trace. Trago, who had struggled with addiction, was a mother of 2, and she remains missing to this day. Shortly after Trago's disappearance, another woman, Tamika Lynch, who was a friend of Trago's, went missing as well. Her body was discovered 3 weeks later by kayakers. It's pretty obvious there was foul play, but the official cause of her death was deemed inconclusive. Then there was the disappearance of Wanda Lemons in November of 2014. She's also never been found. On Christmas Day 2014, Shasta Hemmelrich went missing. Her body was later recovered from the Stiuso River. Authorities claim she took her own life, but her family, as well as many others, think someone took it from her. Then there was the disappearance and discovery of Tiffany Sayers' body in May 2015. Her remains were found in a creek covered by a sheet. And the final victim, Timberly Claytora's body, was found near an abandoned building. She died at the hands of a firearm. And the case just would have been handled completely differently if these women hadn't been battling addiction. That was the one thing connecting all these. They were all involved in that world. And there's just this kind of lax attitude when it comes to situations like this, unfortunately, where authorities are like, well, you know, they're part of that world. This is just what happens. So it really hasn't got the attention that it deserves. Now we move on to the town of Lancaster. Here, there used to be a home with an incredibly dark past, the Mudhouse Mansion. So the mansion's origins go back to the mid-19th century when it was built as a grand estate for a wealthy family. But as time went on, the home fell into disrepair and eventually it was abandoned and left to decay. And over the years, all these urban legends started to form around it. One of the most infamous stories is that the family had actually died in the mansion. Some versions of the tale claim that they were killed by an unknown assailant. Others go that they'd been driven to madness by some sinister force lurking within the mansion's walls. The Mudhouse Mansion was even said to be the birthplace of Bloody Mary herself. The mansion was demolished in 2015, but some folks will still claim to see ghostly figures of the mansion's former residents wandering the grounds, forever trapped in a limbo between the worlds of the living and the dead. Alright, one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in Ohio has to be the Circleville Letters case. Now I'm going to paraphrase here because there's a lot of detail. We could probably do an entire video about this case alone, but I'll go over it. It all started in 1976. Residents of Circleville started receiving these unsettling, threatening letters containing all these intimate details of their personal lives. The letters were postmarked from Columbus, Ohio, but there was no return address. One of the receivers of these letters was Mary Gillespie, a bus driver. She was accused in one of these letters of having an affair with the school superintendent, and the letters just kept coming in from this unknown sender. Then, Mary's husband, Ron, also became a target. He received a chilling ultimatum to end his wife's supposed affair or face dire consequences: death. Ron was found dead in his pickup truck after a mysterious phone call which had seemingly confirmed his suspicion about the letter writer's identity. He'd left in his pickup truck with a firearm but was found dead soon after, having crashed into a tree. Now, authorities ruled Ron's death an accident, but then the letters continued. A number of residents received letters saying that Sheriff Dwight Radcliffe, who had investigated Ron's death, had been involved in a cover-up. At one point, this mysterious writer even planted threatening signs along Mary Gillespie's bus route, one of which she went to take down, only to find out it'd been booby-trapped. If Mary had pulled the sign down in a particular way, a small pistol would have fired at her. Now, one man was arrested, Paul Freshore, but it's never been 100% verified that he was behind these letters. Eventually, he got out on parole. Case is still a mystery to this day. In the Hills and Dales Metro Park in Kittering, Ohio, there's a structure with a very shadowy past, the Haunted Witch's Tower, also known as Frankenstein's Castle. It was completed in 1941, and this 30-foot tall tower was constructed by boys with the National Youth Administration using salvaged stone. Its purpose was to provide panoramic views of the community country club, with its lookout platform offering vistas stretching up to 15 miles. But because of how remote the tower is, a lot of young hooligans started flocking there in the 60s. Graffiti covered its walls, and bottles of liquor and beer cans littered the grounds. Even shingles torn from the roof and glass bottles became ammo for attacks on passing cars below on Peterson Boulevard. Then in 1967, during a thunderstorm, a young woman named Peggy Harmison sought shelter inside the tower with her boyfriend, Ronnie Stevens. Bad move. Lightning struck the tower, killing Peggy instantly. Her body was found on the 11th step, half covered in severe burns. Ronnie survived, but he was found in a state of uncontrollable shock, apparently running around screaming. And ever since that night, there have been stories about the ghost of Peggy haunting the tower. Alright, let's switch things up with a haunted golf club. You don't hear about haunted golf clubs very often. Legend has it that in the 60s, a bride fell from a balcony at Oakhurst Golf Club in Grove City, Ohio, and her ghost is said to haunt the establishment to this very day. One of the most frequently reported sightings involves the ghostly figure of a woman dressed in white, believed to be the ghost of the bride. The upstairs kitchen, located near the ballroom where events are held, is said to be a hotspot for paranormal activity. Employees have reported hearing unexplained sounds of pots and pans clanging and knocking late at night, only to discover that items have been mysteriously rearranged by morning. Alright, we're finishing things off today with Minerva. It all began in August of 1978 when the Caton family reported encountering a strange creature near their home. According to the Catons, they were enjoying a quiet evening when they heard unusual noises coming from outside. They came face to face with this towering ape-like creature standing over 7 feet tall. The creature reportedly had shaggy dark fur covering its body, it had glowing red eyes, and emitted this foul odor. The Catons quickly ran back to the safety of their home and phoned the cops. In the days that followed, all these other sightings of a mysterious creature were reported by other residents of Minerva. Witnesses described similar encounters with a large, hairy beast lurking in the shadows, but none of the stories were scarier than the Catons, who said the creature returned to their property several times, hurling rocks at their home, staring at them through their kitchen window, and even killing their dog. It's one of the most violent Bigfoot cases ever reported.